And we're recording part 2 of essay structure and tips for writing the essay. I'm just going to screen share my documents. So this is derived from the module guide. We've got one more week of a full lecture, but just morning next week, not double lesson, because we've now caught up with all the hours we should have had. And then for the following 1, 2, 3, 4 lessons, it's an hour and a half lesson at 10 o'clock, and then we have one-to-one tutorials, 10 minutes each every week, to go through your ideas and then to start checking paragraphs, etc. And you hand in on the 18th of June at 12 o'clock noon on that Friday. So one more lesson in the morning next week, plus a weekly group meeting about how to write it, and then one-to-one tutorials. So we'll book you in for those as we go. So all I need to think about for this week is to think what genre or what form of topic you want to write about, what type of musical, and which 2 shows you want to write and use as examples. And I said one show should be the earliest version you can find, or one of the early versions you can find of that type, and the other show should be a modern one. So something after 1980 perhaps is modern, depending on when the early version was. So book of musicals could be Showboat and the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, and rock musicals could be Hair and something more modern like Rock of Ages or Bat Out of Hell or something else, School of Rock, We'll Rock You. Even if they overlap with other types of musicals, you can still use them. And as we've said, we've talked about jukebox. We'll talk about Disney shortly and other modern concept musicals as well. So much to choose from, but all I need you to do is to email me, and I'll send my email in the chat in a minute. Email me the link, the form or genre and 2 show titles, and then I'll say, yep, I agree with those, or what about swapping one of these to this one? Once you've done that, then you can have a go at writing your 250-word introduction. So this is in the module guide, this page here. So our target word count is 2,500 words. This is plus or minus 10%. Okay, so we don't mind if you go over a little bit or under, but if you go over and above or below the minimum and maximum, so if you only hit 2,000 words, you will get a 3% penalty, because you won't have had the chance to write enough in depth, and if you write too many words, then you're waffling too much, and it's not good practice for good essay writing. So you do get a penalty. But if you're between 2250 and 2750, then you're fine. The only bit that you count for your word count is the middle section, the actual essay itself, and any quotes you put in speech marks or not speech marks, any headings, and anything like that, and all the references, they are in the word counts. Okay, oops, that one there. Okay, but you don't have to count the title page, you don't count the contents page, you don't count all the website references and book references in the back in the list that we tried to do the other week, and I'll recap that next time. Any other further reading is sources you've read or watched on YouTube but you've not quoted from. You don't count those. And appendices, these are things, additional information that you really want to show. So if you've got some sheet music with lyrics, or just some lyrics, or you've got photos of costume or set design that you really want to put in, you can put those in your appendices. And each appendix can be a different thing. So you could say photos, see appendix 1, sheet music for Sondheim shows, the appendix 2, sheet music for another show, see appendix 3, etc. Let me just check. Sorry, there's a message. Yep, Mason, that's fine. As you go through, you'll think, oh, I really want to put that in. If you've got all this chart hit information about jukebox musicals, you can have a table with saying, here's a single, is it in the show, tick, is it in the musical, tick, how many records did it sell, 15 million. There you go. What date did it go to #1, etc. So you could create your own table or cut and paste a table from other information. But don't put every single newspaper article, every single bit of information you found. That's why we have the references. So if you wanted to, we could click the references and have a look. But if you've got some data, then that's fine. Yeah. Okay. We need to. Okay, I might have to shorten our rehearsal time if we've got to go for Sidco. Okay. Okay. So then we write our introduction, which is what I need to do next. So this is 250 words. And as I said, exactly what I said earlier, it's about the basic facts of what we're looking at, who the show is written or who the shows are written by, and what the generic sort of key features are and what decade did it start in. So like we've done today, the basic information. So what all that practice you've done today is what you need to do in your introduction. Okay. And as I said, you need to summarize the plot in one sentence just to give us a flavor of what you're doing. Then we get to two sections, which are the main 2,000 words of your document. The first bit is really where these types of shows were created, what was happening in the world when these shows were happening. As I said, were there historical events like wars or rising up of a teenager, or were there internet, developments of the internet and rap, and how did the music of the day affect the music of the musicals, or how did the storyline reflect what was going on in the real world, etc. Why did people want to have a book musical with this integrated idea, or why did the mega musical really take off in the 80s, etc. And how film musicals are really popular, etc. So how they fit into the real world, and are there quotes about the shows and about what was happening in history at the same time, which help join it together. You can then go into the second half, which is more about the shows themselves. So you can say, okay, so here is an example of a book musical. It's The Sound of Music. Oh, hi, welcome, Abby. Thanks. Here's this example of our musical, and you can say, okay, so how does it relate to, let's just say, why are the shows important examples of this form? So how can we say that the book musical has a good structure to it, or how does Sondheim use structure differently with these shows? And what detailed analysis can you make of the process of composing, creating, and performing the productions? So you can look at documentaries on YouTube. You can try and find books. There are quite a few books in the library about, well, tons on Rodgers and Hammerstein and the older eras. There are some specific show books like The Lion King on Broadway, Hamilton, behind the scenes. I think we've got The Rent, the Global Book of Rent. We might have the Grimmery in there as well, from Wicked. But there are also lots of particular books on composers. So if you think, okay, who wrote the book? Let's have a look. Those Sondheim books are in the library. So when we can get on the search engine, if you go search the name of the show or search the name of the composer, then they can reserve it for you. You can pick it up in the library. If not, you can browse the library when they open the doors. But as I say, if you know the composer or name of the show, you can probably find the book you're looking for. And do have a look at real books. They're very useful. Better than some websites, although obviously there's a lot more on web that you can choose as well. And don't forget to get out the sheet music and listen to the soundtrack on YouTube or Spotify and really immerse yourself in the show. Do you really know how the show goes, what it's about? And then how do these shows relate to what's happening at the time? Is it like in Wicked, it's all about Elphaba and her being coloured, etc., and or green, and she doesn't fit in, but then eventually they all come to get to know her, and then there's all this stuff about Wizard of Oz, etc. But is it about Rent, which is mostly about sexuality and AIDS, or is it about racism, or is it about war and peace, like Miss Saigon? Is it about a love triangle, which is Les Mis, for example? What sorts of things make the plot tick? Or are they based on real life events, like standing up for pacifism with Vietnam in Hair, for example? So how does it fit in with society, and how does it fit in with the real world? As I said, the first one is also about how did they actually make the show. So if we're talking about Disney and Lion King, etc., how do they do the costumes with the animals, etc.? How do they use dance and movement to symbolize the animals? So all these different types of things you can think of. There's a whole list of things to consider, all the sorts of things we're discussing. Not all of those will work for every single show, of course, but some will. And so you can perhaps look up some news articles, the official website for the show, their social media accounts, YouTube documentaries, okay, to get a whole really good understanding of the show. If you think about it, if you have 2 shows, you only need to write about 500 words each on each show. You might find you don't need 1,000 words of historical background, so you can spend a few more words on the main section about the shows in detail. But find some examples, say, yeah, this show by Sondheim has a random structure, its company, and therefore here's a really good example of different structures making a good concept for a show, for example. Then you need to get your quotes from your reviews, like from The Guardian and for The Stage or various places, saying, okay, did the critics like it, love it, hate it? And perhaps has that changed now? Sometimes a show gets panned really badly, but actually later on has a cult following. So Spring Awakening only lasted 3 months in the UK, but it lasted for about 8 years in America. So why did the British audience not like it? It was all about sex and everything else, and perhaps they didn't want to talk about those sorts of things, but American audiences were quite happy to. You might think, okay, how did the early work or these works influence other people? So we've already talked about Oscar Hammerstein, who taught Stephen Sondheim, who also sort of inspired or taught Stephen Schwartz, and we're going to look at Jason Robert Brown in a moment, and he was very inspired by Sondheim's musicals. So it's like there's either a family tree, or how do we know that show about sexuality opened the floodgates that other shows could also talk about sexuality? So we couldn't have shows like Hedwig and the Angry Inch without having shows like Rent, for example. And we couldn't have shows like Rent without having Cabaret. So there's all these things you can sort of join the dots. And that's what I really want to do when you're researching this, look between the lines and think, okay, that means this and that means that, but where can I go with this? And then, as I say, find those quotes in the reviews. You can look on that IAB, Internet Broadway Database.com, IABDB.com, and dig out the statistics of how many seats it sold on an average week, or how many years did it run, etc. to say, yeah, okay, it ran for many years. Although actually the Rodgers and Hammerstein show, if it ran for 6 months, that was considered a good run. So it wasn't like Cats, so it ran for 30 years, and Les Mis. Some of those shows just ran for a short period and had lots of revivals. Okay, so lots to cram in there in 1,000 words, but I say between these 2 sections, that's your 2,000 words to write up. And I've got some examples of words and phrases you can use to help write it. Then, as you might expect, there's a short conclusion where you go back through and say, these 2 shows are excellent examples of the so-and-so musical, and from that they inspired whatever, blah, 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 the future. And if you've performed these shows, perhaps, or you've seen the shows, you could actually add some personal opinion, and that's where I would let you do first person, thinking I have performed these shows and I feel that so-and-so. However, you can still talk about yourself in third person. So when singing the part of Joanna, it's very important to make sure you're singing a lovely soprano which fits the key, the mood, etc., or whatever it is. So you can still talk about your own personal experiences if you're learning these songs as well. So there's your main thing. You've got your title page and your contents, a very simple contents page, your actual essay, and then after that we gathered together all the references you've quoted from and put them in the list in the Harvard style and the further reading. So remember, it was a surname dot initial with the year and the title and the publisher and the location at the end. And I'll recap that in the next few weeks, so you won't forget that. And then we have at the end all the appendices and all these extra bits of sheet music and stuff. So if you're talking about Sondheim's great use of lyrics, then put some lyrics in the back and highlight the ones that you think are really clever and important. Okay, are there any quick questions on this sort of structure? Feel free to fire away. Okay, yes, Fran.
Would you do like so because we're talking about two shows, would you do like the historical one, both the shows, and then both of them, or would you do like one show historical and then critical, and then the other show like
I see what you mean.
yeah
I'm not fussed actually. If you feel, I mean, this tends to work because if you're talking about the type of show, the development of the book musical, that's more about when that type of musical started, not the actual show that we're talking about. Um, but if you've got two shows that are completely different time periods, like you might want to say, well, let's do 500 words about the history of the original show and 500 words about the show number one. And then, like you said, another 500 words about show number two and another critical 500 words. So you could do like one, you could do it like it's on screen, or you could chop it up and do A, B, and split it into two if you wanted to. We can chat about that in the tutorial because sometimes it might be easy to write about it if you've got um, a book musical, which is like Miss Saigon or slash opera, Miss Saigon. You can talk about it in a number of ways, and sometimes it might be easy just to flow on in a sort of different way. So yeah, I'm not too worried, but as long as you can keep roughly this balance between what you're writing, then that's fine. What we do need is an introduction and a conclusion and all the other bits. But the middle bit, we can work out how it flows best. So this is a suggestion of a template rather than you must follow these exact points. And there's also other stuff that you might find out in your research that I haven't even considered listing, and that will give you extra points as well if you find something else that's really important. Okay, thanks for that. Here is the mark scheme. I'm not going to go through every single column, but basically the first section is about your knowledge and understanding, okay, and also any awareness of ethical issues, which is stuff like casting, race, etc., etc. And that's worth 20% of the whole grade. And that goes up from satisfactory, where you've got a general understanding, but with some misunderstandings of some key concepts, or up to 86 plus, up to 100, up to outstanding understanding of what you're writing about. We've got analysis and synthesis, which we'll talk about again lots more, which is how you analyze what you're finding, all these information bits you're finding. Why is it important? Every time we've had a why question, that's your analysis. Why is it important that a show has popular songs in it for a jukebox musical? Or why is it important that the audience connects with the concept of the concept musical? And again, the better you do, the higher your grade, and we times that by 15%. The evaluation of what you've found. So again, like the analysis, saying again, understanding why things happen is another 10%. The amount of good quality research you do, so is that a varied amount of research of books and musical sheet music or websites or YouTube channels, etc. I want to see a good list of a variety of sources, not just a load of videos or a load of websites. I'm not going to give a particular number of things, but if I see less than 6 resources, then I think you haven't gone into enough detail. So a number of things. I want to see the cast album. I want to see perhaps the DVD or the name of the film listed. So you've seen it somewhere, or you've had a program of it, or you've watched it live, or you've, etc., etc. So all these different ways, and that's worth 15%. The quality of your research. Also, autonomy in learning, and which is basically how well you're getting on with doing the research yourself without necessarily asking me for help. 10% is worth that because I want to train you to be good researchers, and which doesn't mean you can't come to me for help. I don't want you to say I want to get 10 out of 100% on this bit because I'm not going to ask for any help. That's not quite what I mean. I want you to have a clue about what you're doing, but yes, come to me for help when you need it. 20% is on your written style, excuse me, communication, okay, and also does it look good on the page, but mostly about the actual words you're using. Okay. And problem solving is an interesting one. This is a new criteria we've been given. And it does what it says. Are there ways that you're finding new information out that you perhaps hadn't thought about? Or if you couldn't find stuff one way, you found it another way. Or you've read between the lines and had several reviews and you found out the general consensus was this, this, and this. And what else do we say? Oh, yeah, collating data from lots of different sources. And think, oh, yeah, I'm going to add all this stuff together and put it in a table and be quite inventive about how you do it, or find some picture references, etc. As I say, you don't have to go off and interview people, but sometimes doing that in your future work in year 2 and 3 will be really beneficial for your research projects. So those all add up to 100% worth of grade. And so I will highlight, like you see on the other things, I'll highlight the band that you're in and give you a grade, and we times that by the percentage weighting, and it comes up with your final grade. So hopefully over a pass at 40 and somewhere between 40 and 100 at the very top. I think the highest I've ever given was a 90 something, 92. It was like almost publishable piece of work for somebody. Okay, so I remember I talked about judgment, topic, and impact. We want to look at how you can find a topic that you're talking about and say that is good or important, or we have to have this in a show so it makes the audience understand it. Or if you don't have a mix of acting, song, and dance, it becomes very one-sided, or whatever you're talking about. You have to have popular music in a jukebox musical, otherwise it won't be popular, for example. So whatever the impact is, we talked about those quotes earlier. Oh yes, another one is, so that's the quote by Smith, that's right, where it's a quote in speech marks, because that's an actual quote, or a quote that you've rewritten as your own paraphrase, and don't write, I think it's important because, but you can say this is important, just say this is important, because you're finding the information. Okay, for example, here's some information. This is like your brainstorming ideas. The Beatles were famous. Yes, we know that. Cameron Mackintosh created the musical Let It Be. Let It Be was itself a pop song by the Beatles. It was a #1 single. How many records did it sell? If you watch the Carpool Karaoke with James Corden, Paul McCartney said he had a dream about his mother saying, don't worry, just let it be. You'll be all right in the future. And so he turned those into the lyrics of the song. And then we need to say, okay, how can we put all this information you found out today into decent sentences? So here's an example of a few good sentences. So the global success of the Beatles enabled Cameron Mackintosh to ensure that the jukebox musical Let It Be was a success by choosing the most popular hits of their career whilst maintaining a good storyline. Okay, so we've said this is important, or this was a good choice, and therefore this did this. Okay, for example, okay, I'm going to detail. The title song Let It Be, released in March 1970, was a #1 in 10 countries and sold 500,000 singles in the UK and over 2 million in America. And I got that information from the website called Chart History. Therefore, this is my analysis again. This meant that a popular hit single and famous song would make a very strong title for the musical. Oh yeah, the whole title is called Let It Be, okay? And there is some pathos about the meaning of the lyrics, a reassurance from Paul McCartney's mother to him in a dream, based on the James Corden interview. So you've got some stuff that I've just put together by saying what it is. I've got some decent facts and figures, and I've drawn a conclusion in that paragraph saying, therefore, this is a really good title for the show, as well as obviously a good point for having it in the show itself. So that becomes a paragraph of 111 words. So you can once you get your facts together, you can start building up these paragraphs. Okay, here is an example of a really nice set of sentences, which I'll let you read through. And there are a couple of quotes in there in speech marks. And we've got a reference with the surname and the date, which is good. And this is nice. It scores a very high grade of 80+. because it talks about the history, and it says we've got to think about the historical events. So it talks about the 30s, then it talks about the 40s and the World War, and then how the 50s, even when we're looking at the rock musical in the 60s, it gives a good background before we even get to the 60s. And it talks about then the rise of the teenager, and we're about to introduce the Beatles, rock bands, Flower Power, and the swinging 60s. So that's a very good introduction, saying this is what was happening before we got there, and then in the 60s we got into rock music, and then it would go on to talk about rock music and how Hair utilised the rock band in the score, and the songs were very much like the songs people were singing in the charts, etc. So that is like outstanding part of an essay. 70s is still excellent, and we're still looking for detail, we're looking for analysis, we're looking at comparing and contrasting different views, etc., synthesis. And there's still references, Harrison, 2014, and this is where we put it in the sentence. So there's nothing wrong with this paragraph generally whatsoever. There's a bit of an odd phrase here saying, no wonder that the show We'll Rock You featuring Freddie Mercury's band's music, it's a bit of an odd phrase, so that perhaps knocks off a tiny bit because it's a bit confusing. You could have reused the word Queen in there, perhaps. And it says it's on the 11th on the list of 20 longest running musicals, etc. So that's a very good sentence. I don't mind. You can still have the odd little inaccuracy sometimes, and you can still score in the 70s. What we then get in the 60s is if you realise that you have some mistakes. Now, this person's not very good with referencing. They keep putting in the initial in the reference. They've also put the page number in, which is very good for that quote from a book, but you don't need the initial at all. You just need the surname. And for example, here's a good one. There were issues over the song Old Man River. That we don't know what the issues were, and they're not going to tell us. So therefore, that's a bit of a 60s style grade rather than an excellent 70s. If they wanted to say the issues were it was banned by people for saying it's racist, then that goes into the 70s. But because it's sort of left incomplete, or sometimes you might have some mistakes. Generally, even if you're not very good with your spellings, if you right click the word, it will usually tell you what word it thinks it should be, etc. Although that's somebody's name, and old is short for old. But if you do really work on your spell checking, etc., then we can get through some of those sorts of errors. But there might be a bit just a bit confusing where you've got a bit of a paragraph that doesn't flow very well, so that can bring you down slightly as well. And then 50s, this is an actual, those ones I made up, but this is an actual essay one. You can see how I've commented down the side when I've been marking it. So this essay will cover the challenges of having produced a Disney musical. So I would prefer the words investigate or analyze. Okay, what is Disney? Is it Walt Disney the person or Disney the company? Also, how the two shows can relate to human issues at the time, religion, cultural, war and peace, the development, etc., etc., and how these things were both dissimilar in the both musicals, which doesn't make sense. So I've highlighted that bit particularly as a bit weird or odd or wrong. Oh yeah, this sentence has two positives and a negative, and it's confusing. These sentences, when you click on the link, obviously it links to the right sentence in Word. These sentences are hard to understand. Develop your phrasing so it's clear. Because how does one transfer something from an animated film to a stage? And to conclude, we now have live action films coming, which involves the two things, as if we've gone in full circle from being an animation to on stage with real people, to then putting real people into an animated film, which is exactly what we're going to talk about in about 10 minutes. But it's a bit confusing here. Also, terminology. If you're talking about a stage show, it's produced or premiered, and it's not released. Released is when you release a cinema show, a movie. And again, just making sure, Beauty and the Beast was the first Disney musical. No, it wasn't. It was the first stage musical. So if it's descriptive only, or there are significant errors, you're in the 50s. If it isn't fluent at all, you'll be in the 40s, but it still can pass. And if you've really got no idea, it will fail on several areas. But the chance of you just showing your work in tutorials means that actually we hopefully won't have any fails. So that's the main bit for today. As we go through next week, we'll be checking your titles through email. I'm going to paste my email in the chat in a sec. And then also we can then check you're on the right shows. You can write your introductions. And then as we go into the last week with tutorials happening and the 4 weeks of tutorials, there'll be lots of time for you to have lots of one-to-one support as well. And also to demonstrate what you've done in between, because now is the time to write the essay. Right, I'm going to stop recording somehow.